Cool. I think we're live. I'll
Looks
just
like it.
verify on YouTube. But yeah, I think we're live. So hello, everybody. Welcome to warsaw.ex Studio number 2 this time. Thanks for joining. This time we'll do it in English because we have an English-speaking guest. So I wanted to welcome in here with us Joseph Yiasemides from warsaw. And yeah, just a couple of announcements before we begin. At the end of the stream, we'll do a networking session as we used to do when we were having warsaw.ex live, like in person. So I'll send you. So stay until the end of the stream. I'll send you a link to the networking session. It's going to be using a very geeky tool. I think you'll like it. So that's it. We have 3 topics today to cover. So we'll be talking about the Glamorous Toolkit. We'll be talking about Lumen and a bit about security in Phoenix. Cool. I think I see messages on the live chat, so I think it's working. We have 11 viewers from what I see. Okay, so Joseph, maybe you could introduce yourself to the community. Who are you? What you're doing recently?
Yeah. Well, first let me say thanks for having me. I'm in Warsaw. I'm trying to see if I can get sort of overlapping on a few events. I'm glad I'm here. Happy to be here. So I guess I'll tell you the story, or my story, but the parts that are most relevant for us. I guess I started my career in functional programming and doing some concurrency at Erlang Solutions. That was Erlang to start with, and then lots more Elixir after that. So that was server-side systems and backend systems, both technical domains, like sort of AMQP rather than Q, that kind of thing, and also business domains. And then I went and did some Python and, well, actually a lot of Go and some Python at Monzo. And I really wanted to do that because I wanted to sort of compare and contrast with functional programming languages, get to see what else is there. And about a year ago, I started at Port0 on some Pharo. Pharo is a kind of small talk. And so I did some work in that, learned some interesting things there. And recently I've done some JS for the front end. So I guess I can tell you a bit about Port0 as well. So we have 3 competencies. So we do DevOps for ISPs, we do some security, and we have a software competency too, and I'm team lead of our software competencies.
Oh, perfect. I'm glad to have you as well in the studio. I'm hearing that I'm seeing that there's an echo. It could be coming from me. So is it still noticeable, or let me know on in the comments because I lowered the volume, so it should be fine maybe right now. But if not, I'll take my headphones. That's fine as well.
I can do the same. If it's still a problem, I'll put my headset on.
Yeah, sure. So let us know in the comments if it's still a problem. Okay, cool. Yeah, so I'll try to lower the volume or something. Okay, cool. So yeah, so for today we have 3 topics to cover, and I think the first topic we wanted to talk about is something Joseph sent over my way. Which is called the Glamorous Toolkit, which is pretty awesome. I must admit I haven't heard about it before you sent me the link to the talk from the I think it's the creator of the Glamorous Toolkit. This talk introducing it by Tudor Gerba, I think. Yeah, and anyway, for those of you who might not know, Glamorous Toolkit is a pretty cool kind of IDE or a programming environment, where in general, like originally IDEs, they all look kind of the same. Like if you take the exemplary IDE like Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code, or like IntelliJ IDs, or Eclipse even, they all look the same. They have kind of the file tree on the left, the text editor in the middle, and the even when you're debugging, you have a small window of preview of the functions, etc. But that's basically all you have in a modern IDE, and it's been like this for years. So the Glamorous toolkit is a kind of a, from what I understand about it, and let me know if that's not accurate. It's kind of rethinking of how we work with code and how we introspect our programs while we create them, while we debug them. So from what I saw in the presentation, one of the aspects is that like most of the current debugging solutions out there focus on representing values as as strings in the IDE UI, while that's not always the best kind of representation. So for example, if you're, let's take a Erlang or Elixir example, when you have a supervision tree, showing the process ID of the processes under the supervision tree, or the names of the gen servers, is probably not the best representation of that data. Probably not the easiest one to understand of how they are put together. So Glamorous Toolkit is an attempt to kind of make it more natural for us to debug our programs, more to represent the values in a way that fits them better. You said that you've worked with Pharo, and I guess you worked with Glamorous Toolkit. What was your experience of it? Like, what did you like about it? Or
yeah, so I guess we can sort of try starting at the beginning and tell a version of history that might be accurate. So I guess Smalltalk and sort of the integrated development environment there was always, I guess, ahead of its time. And if you sort of go and use the Smalltalk today, it's still sort of really interesting and maybe still ahead of its time in a lot of ways. But the Glamorous toolkit adds even more, right? So it's sort of it's interesting how much they've been able to introduce, and how much they've been able to, in some cases, rethink, bring ideas that we had sort of, or that we know about in the software world, and kind of consolidate them and make them sort of whole, or a usable, a cohesive whole. So what was my experience using it? Well, that it's a great way to have a conversation, right, with your users, with your domain experts, because when you don't have to rely on a string representation to sort of show something or demo something, or explain something, and you can craft whatever kind of user interface you want, or that's useful, then you can open or have a conversation there. I think that's a lot more meaningful. So I guess that sort of sums up my experience, and I got some examples where this would have been useful. So I guess if we take banking, I worked with a team who put together essentially rules, sort of deciding on whatever it is that we were deciding on, as in to decision someone and say, this person, we can give this person so much of a loan, for example. And it was difficult there, because obviously your domain experts, people who know about loans, know about finance, want to they draw a nice diagram, a sort of tree diagram, explaining the rule. So they have that, say, on conference, wherever it is. and you go and code it up, and it's really difficult for someone to really look at that when they're a domain expert, not a programmer, right? To tell if that's doing what they want. So so GTE, the Glamorous toolkit, really gives you a way to have like a really easy sort of translation from the code you type up to the visual representation that you can provide for someone. So there's a kind of dialogue you can have there with your users and your domain experts that probably couldn't have otherwise.
Is it like because from what I saw there was a like a library of widgets, maybe? Is that an accurate description of widgets that allow to represent data in different ways? So is that like is the idea like a set of those widgets, or is it that you can build your own and kind of along with your code, when you develop your code and you develop your business logic, you can also develop the way of representing that in your IDE so we can work with it easier?
Yeah, so it's the latter. It's exactly the latter. So I think if we look at most IDs out there, or every one of them, they sort of have widgets. You can't change them particularly easily, but you can go off and write a widget that might be useful for you. But the sort of important thing here is that you can craft a widget really easily for not just a particular language, say, or just to do debugging, but to really craft a widget or more than one widget, in fact, for whatever code you're writing. And so you're able to tailor that kind of visual representation, make whatever you want out of it, whatever is useful for you, and then kind of go about programming with that widget there open to the side. So I think to sort of help explain, the way Tudor put it to me was that actually we can think about it in terms of having a language that you can easily script up a widget that's useful for you, right? So it's about really making it easy to draw up a visualization and rely on our perceptive abilities rather than our analytical abilities to actually do some of this coding.
Okay, I get it. Yeah, it's pretty cool. And I guess for in the Erlang and Beam world, some of those use cases are probably covered by like Observer, where you have the same kind of level of introspection. So how do you compare those? Like, is it that Observer has all those features, or do you see anything that that could be ported to Elixirland from the Glamorous toolkit?
So good question, and I kind of did a Google on that kind of thing a while ago, and someone had suggested something like Smalltalk for Elixir, I think, and there was a thread maybe on the Elixir forum where people were like, I don't really want to code in the Observer. So the Observer is really very focused on Erlang and Elixir, right, and OTP, and you can't code in it, and you can't craft the Observer and make what you want of it, right? So it's not domain specific. So the difference is obviously that with GT you can craft an observer essentially for all of your code. So you can have the same kind of introspective and visual kind of power that the observer gives us, but for whatever code you're writing, whatever that might be. So,
and are there any attempts to bring Elixir to the Glamorous toolkit IDE?
So it turns out it's a small world, and I think the communities have had some contact, and so there is currently an Elixir parser. I'm not sure what the status is of it, but obviously a parser is sort of it's sort of only at the text level or the language level, right? There's so much introspection that the Beam can already do, and obviously there's a whole runtime there as well, so we can connect to that maybe more naturally than sort of using a parser. We can actually connect to a node, rely on a node to sort of get out all the things that Beam offers. So I guess the short answer is yes, there's some work on that front. There's an Elixir parser that's at least been started. But a better approach might be to look at implementing a distributed Erlang node in Smalltalk, and really relying on a connection to a node basically to get at everything that the Beam offers. Give you, all the kind of real time or near real time sort of feedback and introspection that something like Live Dashboard gives us. Except that we could again tailor it to whatever domain we're working
on. Okay, I get it. That's pretty good, because at first I was. By the way, I'm seeing some comments about music. I turned off the music. Let me know if it's better right now. That was a test. I wanted to make it more interesting, but if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And also, about the echo, if there's anything wrong with that. So yeah, so when I was reading about it, the first thing that came to my mind was, like representing, for example, the supervision tree and how messages are passed between processes in Erlang. Maybe that would be a thing that could be represented in an IDE, because basically when we are working in a highly concurrent environment like the Beam, where you have processes, agents talking to each other, I think it's pretty important to see how in terms of development, and in terms of working with the code, how things are put up together. And as you said, like some of that you can do by analysis of the code, by seeing, okay, there's a message sent to this kind of gen server. The gen server handles that, whatever. But sometimes it's easier to kind of actually see the messages flowing between the processes. You can do some of that via Observer, because you can introspect the process. You can see the messages that are coming in, but it's not the same level of visualization, right? It's kind of it will be Observer is very much like you fire it up. You can check the supervision tree tab and see how gen servers are set up. But in terms of debugging, you need to do a lot of that stuff manually, kind of opening processes, sending messages to them. So I was thinking that maybe on that level, but your experience suggests something more higher level in terms of you could actually represent things that are interesting from a business point of view in the IDE, and work, for example, with domain experts, as you said, on specific kind of piece of code that's represented in a widget in this IDE, which is pretty interesting. So, any other examples you have that were used these kind of powers?
Yeah. So exactly the kind of thing you mentioned, I suppose, right? Or you talked about, which is we actually have some really nice tooling to help with debugging and sort of build message sequence diagrams and that kind of thing in Erlang and Elixir, right? The Observer being one of them. There are a bunch of, we've got Live Dashboard now as well. And there's some other tooling by the community. Some of it is really, really great. But a lot of it relies on essentially serving a web page to get at those visualizations, right? And so this is all technical stuff, right? It's all technical, a technical domain in terms of debugging messages, processes, that kind of thing. And so, GT and a lot of Smalltalks, but let's stick to GT, which is really trying to be an IDE of sorts. Would let you build, those kind of debugging UIs and facilities. It would let all of us, or that kind of system would let all of us build those, right, more easily, right? So we wouldn't have to rely on a web front end. We'd be able to do that more immediately, more quickly. So that's both, very technical domains, as in, understanding your process tree, the messages that are going to and from, any kind of debugging you might have to do. building that tooling more easily, more visually. And I guess another nice technical example, so sort of moving away from business domains. How many times have you heard of someone say, "Wouldn't it be great if we have a monorepo, and that's nice because we can do all sorts of analysis on it, and we have microservices, and so we can do analysis across that, and it lets us do all sorts of cool things like go about editing code more conveniently, that kind of thing." Have you ever sort of come across that kind of thing where someone says, "Yeah, we've got a monorepo and we can do all this cool stuff in it"?
You're asking if I had this kind of experience that
Yeah,
that we have a monorepo and we can kind of. Are you describing the experience of debugging across microservices in a system?
exactly. I think microservices is a good example here.
Yeah. So that's usually when working with services, I try to focus on a unit, which basically then you need to make sure that on the border between those units, the contract is specified and it's met. But yeah, you're right that in terms of a system built up from a lot of small microservices, it would be interesting to kind of have the ability to view into them as they are running, as you're working on them in one IDE. That of course depends on the probably on the language they're written in, on the technology, and depending. I'm wondering how we could correlate, because for example, it's the same kind of problem where when you have distributed tracing, for example, that you need to correlate the requests that are coming in. You have requests coming in, and then you need to assign a correlation ID, track it, pass it across the services and track it. So it's kind of a similar thing then. What I'm thinking is, even if you passed the problem or found a solution to the problem of having heterogenic kind of technologies in those microservices, you still have the challenge of correlating stuff between between those microservices running.
That's one example. I think the one that comes to mind is you're using some kind of queuing system, and your services are connecting through that, or some of them are, and you've got like a whole bunch of them, and you just don't know how they connect. And one of the arguments behind it, that I've heard, at least some of the rationale behind that kind of monorepo, might be to have everything in a monorepo. You can run some static analysis and generate like a picture of how all your services are connected through which queues. And people do that occasionally. You kind of get the analysis in there. You piece together results, and then you kind of use some tool to draw something useful out for you. And with GT, or with something like GT, the idea is that that's really easy to do over and over again, right? When you want to in your IDE, you don't have to step out of your IDE to get that kind of insight when you want it. And so that's the example sort of on the server side that I like to think about.
Yeah, that's a problem I actually was struggling with a bit lately, is that I kind of wanted to visualize how different business logic, parts of the business logic, parts of a bigger process interact with each other. And I was thinking, like, maybe I could do some static analysis. Like we have some services that are called within the cluster via kind of RPC communication. And you kind of have the counterpart in another service that's connecting to the RPC. So I was thinking maybe I could do kind of like static analysis of seeing where are the connections between the services, and which parts of this service actually are a dependency of another service, because if you have a microservice that's connected to a lot of other services, probably a given service that uses it just uses a subset of functionality, and maybe that's also a criterion for splitting it somehow, meaningfully. So I was thinking that maybe it would be possible, but then when I was thinking, how to correlate these different technologies, because we have Ruby in the backend, we have Elixir in the backend. So correlating these different technologies together, it would require kind of a meta model or something.
Yeah. So actually, it's interesting that you say that, because there is a sort of language meta model, and the people at Think who work on GT have done research in that area. Actually, I think it's research from maybe 10, even 20 years ago on language meta models. So there is a model there that you can use if you have a parser and that kind of thing. There are parsers for various languages to be able to get at that kind of information, but in a more or less language agnostic way, I think. Yeah.
That's cool. I'm wondering how that works with languages from different families, like a meta model for a functional language. Does it fit the object-oriented paradigm? Like how does it work? Do you know any more about that?
But I guess the way I picture it, or rather, the way I look at that is most languages are made up of identifiers of sorts. There's something that more or less resembles an object, right? In functional programming, there's definitely a kind of data type, or a compound or a composite data type that represents that kind of thing, a structure essentially. I think there's enough sort of common ground to be able to say these things are sort of similar. Especially for the kind of analysis which isn't necessarily really, really rigorous analysis, but just picking out the right item in the right structure or object or data type, whatever it is.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Cool. What's the language that the Glamorous toolkit is implemented in? Do you know?
So it's written in Pharo, and Pharo is a sort of dialect of Smalltalk. So for those of us who don't know so much about Smalltalk, it's I guess it's one of the grandparents of object-oriented programming. Not quite the first, but it's pretty near one of the first object-oriented programming languages. It's a sort of pure object-oriented language, so it's just objects, and that's all there is, or objects and messages. And it's
I think
also
Ruby was inspired a lot by Smalltalk.
And Erlang, it turns out too. So they have common ancestry.
Cool. That's pretty cool. Okay, cool. So I think, shall we move on to the next topic?
Sure.
So the next topic we want to talk about is something I read an article, I think, recently. There was an article in Elixir Radar as well, and it's called Lumen. And basically, Lumen is a new kind of alternative Beam implementation designed for, as I understand it, for WebAssembly, basically. So it's an entire new runtime, right? Built, I think it's built in Rust. I can actually show what I'm talking about in a browser.
Runtime is in Rust, and I think the compiler too, or part of the compiler.
Yeah. I'll just share my screen maybe. Whoops. You break down? Can you hear me?
I'm still here.
Oh, okay. So my screen just froze. That's funny. I think I'll need to
reconnect.
Yeah, I'll need to reconnect. Just bear with me. Sorry for this. I'm back. But I am not hearing you.
Glad to see you're back.
Yeah, I think screen sharing on Linux is difficult because it all depends on, I think, on the Windows server you're using. So if you're using X, then you can share a screen. But if you're using Wayland, sometimes it's not working correctly. So I'll try again. Let's see. Share screen. And whoa, that's crazy. Yeah, so this is Lumen. Basically, can you see my screen?
I can.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. Yeah. So basically, this is this new Beam implementation, and it's pretty interesting. I was trying to actually, what I was trying to show is the website, but doesn't matter. I'll find it in a second. So it's pretty interesting in terms that in terms of the rationale. So I really recommend the first talk about Lumen from the creator. It's actually a guy working at Dockyard, from what I know, and the rationale behind Lumen is that in Dockyard they use Elixir on the back end, and then on the front end they use a lot of Ember, obviously JavaScript, but Ember, React, etc. And they were thinking about this heterogeneous kind of stack they could write both backend and front end in. I'm not sure why they didn't consider Node.js. He didn't say anything about that, but
I want to stick to Elixir then.
Yeah.
It's a nice language, right?
But anything, so yeah, so they had a choice of Node.js, and they went with creating a new Beam implementation.
Yeah,
That's
I mean, interesting choice. I think
that's
maybe I'd have been more inclined to do that kind of thing before I went to other technologies. I gave them a go. I like TypeScript, so I'm not sure that's what I would have done, but
it all depends on how much they invested in Elixir already. So if they invested in Elixir more than they did in JavaScript, then maybe it's a good reasoning behind it.
I'm sure
It's still it
part of the
sounds like overkill still, but sorry.
part of the rationale was having the same language on the front end and on the back end, and if you already chose Elixir on the back end and you really you really want to use that there, then then that means you've got to move it over to the front end as well if you want to share common modules and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and from what I understand, it's like they are targeting WebAssembly, which is kind of like a specification of having a very low level kind of like a bytecode that it can be executed in the browser. So from what I understood as well, it's like it was very difficult to kind of use the current Beam implementation and put that in WebAssembly because of, for example, I think it was about system calls that are spread across the Beam implementation, the current one, and that would need to be kind of shimmed or something, factored out, and it was very difficult to do because of the shape of the code base of the Beam. That's one thing, and also the size of the bundle, basically the generated one. I think it was huge because of there was this case with the apply function, I think, where you couldn't actually during compile time you couldn't effectively decide which parts of the code are going to be called, so which parts should end up in the bundle, because you had the apply function that could basically invoke any function on any module. And I think in this implementation they're actually removing it, so that upon compile time they know which functions are called in your bundle, and they can kind of do some tree shaking, remove the unnecessary code, and ship a smaller package. So it's a pretty interesting project. It's kind of when I'm thinking using Elixir for both the backend and front end, first thing I think is like cross-compiling maybe to JavaScript. There are some cross-compilers that do that. Second thing I'm thinking is live view, because that kind of solves that problem as well on some level. I know that I haven't built anything big in live view yet. I've just built like a ticker counter kind of thing. So that's the biggest thing. It's the biggest UI I built. But I'm thinking that
I have.
yeah, but I'm thinking that when I kind of see that it might be very difficult. It might be difficult to actually build a highly interactive UI just using live view. So you might need some front end code that does some of the drawing, some of the business logic, and data fetching. Yeah, so there might be kind of a reason to kind of compile Elixir, but one of the reasonings I liked about Lumen, or one of the reasonings behind Lumen, it resonated with me pretty well, was that today's front-end applications are so big. They like, consider Facebook, the front-end app for Facebook. There's like so many pieces, and everything is talking to each other. And whenever you get like a message or a notification, stuff pops up in the UI, etc. So one of the reasonings behind Lumen is that Beam is, and OTP especially, is a pretty good fit for the front end, for the web, because of its resilience. So currently, I think I think I saw this problem pretty often, that when you have a UI and you have a non-critical part, but for some reason it fails with an exception or whatever, it can bring the entire UI down. Sometimes. So I think like I get the idea that they're arguing that by putting the OTP on the front end in the browser, you could build UIs that are more resilient, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. Interesting. I don't really think of UIs needing to be so resilient, but obviously it depends on the application, right? Sometimes you really do need them to work, because otherwise things are useless. Yeah, I guess OTP sort of matches on the sort of component thing quite nicely as well, right? In terms of decomposing things into trees and grouping them and that kind of thing. So aside from isolation, it's not just isolation; it's more the decomposition into trees there. Yeah, and the concurrency, right? I mean, there's so much there that's that's happening concurrently. Notifications. If you look at Facebook, like the example you gave, you got the feed. You potentially got the Messenger app popping up on the side. So I guess components go some way to helping on that kind of thing. And OTP just seems almost. Let's reverse that and say components almost seem like an OTP like structure, right? Yeah. I guess when I think about front end and back end and Elixir doing both of those, I think about live view as well. I guess you always need the network to work for live view to work, right? So that's the only downside there.
Yeah, but in today's web applications, like when don't you need the network? I mean,
Well,
upon first load maybe, and then
I don't
maybe
know.
the app could be working after the first load. Yeah, that's true. Like in those cases, but when you have a highly interactive interface that, as you said, like for example, in cases where you have high concurrency, you have a lot of connections open, you have WebSockets open, you have some fetches going on, etc. I think in those cases you need some network connection anyway. It just for cases like when you have a front end app that's very heavy on front end, like some of the examples with WebAssembly I saw was like compiling Unreal Tournament or something and putting it in the browser using WASM. And in those cases, of course, like that's not a case for live view. But for apps that are very interactive in terms of you have connections to the backend service, a lot of connections to the backend services, I think live view is still a good fit. And I kind of feel that I kind of see the analogy with components, because basically like either components or the document object model basically is it's kind of the same, where you have a tree-like structure and things are nested below one below another. It's kind of the same like in a supervision tree. So yeah, I'm wondering that could be interesting to actually model. Imagine this: if you had a React-like component implemented as a gen server or as a supervisor that you can compose together, right? And it has its own state. It can pass some state to its children, etc. That would be an interesting concept as well.
Yep. Yeah, I guess going back to Lumen sort of and then live view as well. So much desktop software like Slack, I think VS Code, right, is written on top of Electron.
Yeah, right.
So how much sense would it make to run a backend in Elixir and then serve out, the HTML essentially to do a live view kind of thing if you wanted to write on top of Electron? I guess it makes a lot more sense to have something like Lumen and then say you can run that inside Electron and write native or near native apps for the desktop in Elixir. So yeah, that might be a nice place to go.
Yeah, but now I'm thinking, the case you said with live view, where you could have like a Visual Studio Code that's basically rendered using live view. You could actually ship, Beam, like a Beam application with inside kind of a program like Visual Studio Code or an IDE like Visual Studio Code. It's not like Beam, when you compile it, is not big. Like consider Nerves, for example. When you compile a Nerves project, it's like 20. I think it was like 40 megabytes with the Linux. So it's crazy. It's pretty small. So that would be interesting. An interesting side project to kind of create a live view application that's actually a code editor, and it kind of renders into Electron, but I'm not sure if Electron supports because Lumen is targeting WebAssembly, right? So there's probably going to be kind of a compilation to WebAssembly of Lumen or through Lumen. I don't know. No, actually, it has to be like your application running on Lumen being compiled to WebAssembly, right? What you're
Right.
saying.
Yeah. What you were saying. I don't know
Yeah.
if Electron supports WebAssembly, but if it does, then maybe that's a chance to get Lumen on there and
In the end, it's Chromium, so I guess I'm not
right.
sure, but
If they're only using the V8
yeah,
machinery, then I don't know. Maybe they're not just using V8, and it's more
yeah.
than that. Yeah.
I'm also wondering how a highly concurrent language like Elixir is going to work with the web runtime, because as far as I know, like JavaScript, for example, it's asynchronous, but it's using mostly one core. It's just non-blocking kind of async. I'm wondering how that will work with Beam. Would it still use like one? That'll be very, very bad for it. Like if it still used just one core and kind of virtualized the processes on top of that, that would be maybe not effective. I don't think anybody would spend so much time in building it then.
Right. Well, I hope not. Well, I hope they have a workaround or they know their solution is on the horizon. But I guess, yeah, I don't know so much about browsers these days. But yeah, the underlying model is different. I guess a lot of it will come down to the runtime. That that's there. So I wonder how they worked around that or worked to get that kind of concurrency in place. Yeah, I guess if we're talking about UIs mostly, and more of a UI based sort of piece of software, right? Then maybe that there aren't going to be sort of we're not going to be scaling on this platform to thousands and thousands of processes, and it will just be the 24 processes we need to have a UI work, or maybe 100. I don't know. Maybe it just won't be
Yeah,
that
sure, because
that we're used
it's
to.
running on the client server side, right? So
Right.
it's not like it's supporting that many clients as a backend application, for example, where you can spawn a new process for each incoming connection or for each Phoenix channel or a Phoenix channel connection.
Yeah,
but you still need it all depends, but because if you're building something very generic that you're not saying directly, hi, this is just for building UIs, it's actually the entire Beam virtual machine that you can use in the browser, then it kind of goes without saying that it's coming with the concurrency guarantees and OTP and everything, and it works as Beam works on the back end. So it's going to be interesting to see that.
It will be.
See that working. I'm really waiting for a React kind of thing based on Gen Server. That's going to be last studio. We were actually showing this. It was called Surface, I think. It's like have you seen it?
No, I read about it. I think for the first time last week.
Yeah. So it's like React components for live view, basically.
Okay. Oh right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Now that jogged my memory. Yeah.
Yeah. So taking that even further, you can have a component as a separate process that has its own state, has its own children, associated processes, can pass the state, can draw itself, etc. That's it's going to be pretty
Funny
interesting
when
because
you put it like that. I'm not so sure I'm inclined to go about it that way. But yeah, maybe that could work. Maybe that's a good solution, good approach. I have to think about it more. Maybe try it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also know that some of the problems that like React was solving on the front end side, and also Ember with he had this optimization to the rendering engine called Glimmer or something like that. I think some of the problems that they were solving was basically rendering stuff and rendering. I think there was also like asynchronous kind of rendering going on where you could render a couple of components at the same time asynchronously. So in this kind of model with Beam basically runtime in the browser, that would be trivial basically. And you know with and it fits with React as well because you know it's like it's not mutating. You're not mutating the tree. You're basically re-rendering, throwing out you know components that are not up to date, and creating new components instead of them. Of course, there's this HTML diffing kind of aspect of it, but that's just an optimization. In principle, you're basically every time a property of the component changes, you're throwing it away, creating the component and its children anew. So in terms of an asynchronous or a highly concurrent kind of runtime like the Beam, that would be interesting to kind of be able to render a lot of things at the same time because of the nature of how it works. Yeah, I'm pretty excited for this project. It's pretty cool.
I guess. I mean, I wonder how much of it will really feel like you're rendering at the same time, right? It's just something you're gonna get, and it's gonna, you know, it's gonna render, and you probably won't be able to tell so much that it's happening, you know, at the same time, I guess. But the programming model could be really interesting.
Yeah, for the end user, it's not going to be like you know the difference will be the speed of rendering. You know, the speed of the UI changing. So I guess for simple applications, it's not a problem. But for complex UIs where you have you know nested hierarchies of components, that could be an improvement, I think.
Yeah,
But I'm always skeptic with these kind of you know new runtimes, new cross compilers, etc.
yeah. Well, I guess it's my nature to be skeptical, but maybe optimistic at the same time. Strange, but yeah, I'm always looking to see what we can learn. I think, yeah, and yeah, I trust the people at Dockyard.
Okay.
Yeah, so in terms of thinking some things through, maybe they thought it was a worthwhile experiment. Maybe they have loads of confidence in that this is going to be the next big thing in that space. I don't know.
Yeah, like Node.js. I remember the day when Node.js, you know, there was the release of Node.js. There was this talk by, I can't remember the name. I'm really bad at names,
By
but
Ryan,
huh?
by Ryan, who
Ryan, yeah, the creator of Node.js.
yeah, I think
Yeah,
his name.
so okay, yeah, so I remember this talk he had about you know the release of Node.js and why it makes sense to have you know the same language on kind of the client side and on the backend server side, and all that you know promise of reusability, etc. So I remember like thinking, oh, this is big, but then I was talking to some people, and they were saying, yeah, I saw that it's not going to work. You know, like there was already attempts like this in the past, and it's not going to work. And this time, like it worked out in terms of Node.js. I mean, it's a huge ecosystem right now.
Yeah,
So
it's big. It is really big. There are also the good and bad that come with that, right? So it's really big, and you know, TypeScript is for me is something I can kind of I'm sort of more content with, I suppose, coming from Elixir. Um, I was sort of happier working with Node than I thought I would be. Yeah, definitely. Um, Definitely a sort of different space. I think in terms of reusability, I think that's down to us. Really working on the reusability front and sharing code between the front end and the back end. I think um, so much of that is down to us as engineers to get that code in the shape it needs to be to actually not just use Node on the back end, but also use JavaScript on the front end and the back end and really have that reuse. I guess this is actually really similar to sort of um, you know drawing the line nicely in Elixir in terms of repos and contexts and all of that vocabulary that we're using now. If we've captured our domain entities properly, or whatever entities we're working with, then those are things we can reuse, right, on the front end and the back end. So that's HTTP over, sorry, JSON over HTTP, or it might be, it's the same sort of thing when you're talking about putting entities on a queue, right? Whatever it is you're using, or sticking them in the database. That's all about. All the commonality there is sort of important. Yeah, I really think that's down to us. I really tried to sort of when I was doing some TypeScript, I was um, trying to make that happen. I don't think I really got enough of a chance to because I didn't work as much as I wanted to on the back end side of things, but I could see it sort of taking form in terms of reusability.
What do you mean, like reusing the entities that you've specified on the backend side, for example, I don't know, like database entities or business entities on the front end side, or?
Yeah, exactly. So essentially, the way I picture it is that we have a common directory, and you got all your important entities in there, and then you can use those in your front end and send them over the wire, and then use them again on your back end to do whatever it is you're doing.
So you tried this approach?
I was working towards it.
Okay. But what were you thinking to like? What was the idea of representing the entities so that they are understandable by both the backend and the front end?
Well, it's just you use the same data, the same entity, right? The same object.
Yeah, but what was the language, the specification written in of the kind of entity?
Oh, it was just
Was it like a
JavaScript object. That was that.
Okay.
Yeah. Just a regular old JavaScript object.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always when I think about reusing some of like entities that exist on the backend side, I'm always cautious because that might be leaking some of the implementation details of your backend code to the front end. I don't know. Like, I think in terms of reusability, sometimes it's good, but sometimes the approach of keeping the front end pretty slim and focused on rendering the UI together, and keeping the back end for the heavy lifting and calculations, and for the domain kind of logic, makes more sense to me. I know that there are what was the GraphQL?
Or something like that.
Yeah, that too. But I'm thinking now GraphQL, etc. Like you're getting almost direct access to the database almost. Like you can expose database entities, and you can get direct access to that on the front end side. So on one hand, that's powerful, and I've been working with for example, I've been working with Firebase on some hobby projects in the past. And it's basically a document kind of database that you can connect to from your front end directly, using some authentication mechanisms like Google Auth or whatever. and it was very good for prototyping when you needed, when all of your operations were basically read an object, modify it, and write it back. But once it gets more complex, like the operations that you're doing get more complex, I think the reusability of entities is not enough. And at some point, I think backend, like not the backend, but the business logic tends to go towards something I learned from Marcin, who's on the stream. It's like verb oriented instead of like noun oriented, I think he called it, or that you focus on the things that happen, or on the actions that are taken, not on the things that these actions are being performed on.
Right.
And when the project gets complicated, I think it's gravitating towards the what happens, not what's the thing that is being modified. So
yeah,
that's
true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I guess that's sort of the difference between object-oriented programming and then functional programming, right? One is focused a lot more on the nouns, and the other a lot more on the verbs. Either way, though, yeah, if we look at a lot of the software out there, I reckon you're right. It is that way in terms of the noun doesn't change so much, but the verb changes a whole lot. Or the verbs around it. So, I mean, I guess if that's true, then having like a common entity shouldn't be so hard, right? Because the noun is there; it doesn't change. There's nothing you're really leaking out, hopefully, that you don't want to be. As in, the noun can be pretty lightweight.
Yeah, that's true.
If the verbs are all sort of distinct and growing all on their own on the back end, then that's kind of contained there. So that's sort of nice.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I get it. Cool. Yeah, I'm really interested in what happens with Lumen. Is it going to be like, a next big thing, or is it just a hobby project? Because it sounds, for me, for now, it sounds like a super nerdy thing to do. But and I don't really, for now, I don't feel, maybe, I mean, I'm obviously missing a lot. I haven't dig into it too much, but at first glance, for me, it looks like I don't know, like there are simpler solutions, but maybe there aren't.
That hasn't stopped a lot of working out, right, in the past. I guess I learned about Lumen a year or so ago, and I'm glad it's still being worked on. I'm happy about that. Interested to see where it goes to.
Cool. Yeah, and the last thing I wanted to talk about, maybe let's move on, because it's 8 p.m. already. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is something connected more to your specialization right now, in terms of security of IT systems. And there was this blog post by I think Jose about an upcoming solution for authentication in Phoenix. Did you read that one?
Yep, I did.
Did you like in either in Port Zero or before, like what were the most challenging things in terms of authentication and security in Elixir that you needed to tackle?
There was some work we did on RabbitMQ around using TLS certificates to authenticate clients, and if we look at that, a lot of the work there was about. So this is the Trust Store plugin for Rabbit that I'm talking about, and a lot of that was about understanding TLS, right? How certificate chains work. So that's the domain there, and then really understanding how that works in Erlang, how to get at it, how to work with it. I think that was probably the most challenging thing in terms of getting to grips with it. The sort of conceptual part, and then working on the Erlang code to actually do that properly. I think the code is really, really short. It's probably a handful of lines. So it's probably, I think it's, if I recall correctly, it's 3 functions or function heads. So there's a base case, and then there are two inductive cases. So the code isn't a lot, but it was a lot of work to get to know that. The Erlang side of things, the OTP side of things, and then the conceptual side of things as well. Definitely the hardest thing in that area. And then if we kind of, I guess, move away from more technical stuff and start thinking about, the application we write, kind of application we write more often. Getting like the granularity you want in terms of authorization, like what are users allowed to see, what they have access to and what they don't, the kind of permissions they have on whatever objects or entities we're talking about. It feels like there's a lot of boilerplate code there, right? And making that clean and understandable, that's got to be hard. That's definitely.
So that's one of the things that wasn't when Phoenix was created. That's one of the things that wasn't thought about. I feel like it wasn't like thought through at the beginning. So there was a lot of work on splitting the domain logic or on how to work with data validation and returning that, etc. But actually, a very important aspect of securing a web application wasn't, I think that's the reason why Jose recently focused on that aspect. But it was kind of like, okay, yeah, do something. Like there are libraries, and do your best. We root for you. And I know that there's a lot of libraries for, I don't know, managing passwords, like for Common In, I think, was one of the libraries that we've used in the past in terms of hashing, etc. But it's not only about hashing, right? In terms in web applications, about just using a password. It's so much more than that. So I was wondering, like, what's your experience in maybe like securing web applications, especially, and making sure that they're
pretty
they're
much
secure.
the standard stuff, right? I guess 2 things. I think authentication is probably easier. Authorization is a difficult one, right? Because authorization is this kind of cross-cutting concern where it sort of intertwined between your domain, your functional code, the stuff that matters to you, and then how you're delivering that, which is the operational, right? So that's really that's a difficult thing to sort of unintertwine, right? And then if we go back to Jose's post, I think the really nice thing that he wrote there was that something about it having to be simple, and how that's important, and that's absolutely true. Like he explains, with some other options out there, maybe not in the Elixir world, but in other language communities. If you pull out, or if you use an off-the-shelf, or use an authentication solution from whatever library, options and things like that can make it really difficult to really know what's going on, right? So being able to look at the code, being able to have a sort of what you see is what you get kind of code for however it is you work around your authentication or authorization. I think that's really important. Just like he explains, because because that will lend itself to audit, right? Understanding, you'll be able to work out or work through any issues there. It'll just be clear and concise and hopefully correct, right? With bug free. So
yeah. For me, with authorization, I always have the problem of with authentication. I always have the problem. My first problem is to distinguish these two words, authentication and authorization. But
I can give it a go if you want. Or
no, I always mix them up. So that's the reason. But one of the problems I often have is at what layer in your code do you put the authentication, for example, and how much should it be coupled with your domain, right? Because at some point in your domain, you have like, I don't know, like clients or some kind of an entity that represents a user, or one of the types of users you have. And then, where do you put, but on the other hand, like, for example, authentication in web apps very often relies on like cookies or something, being sent over. And that's strictly an HTTP kind of the web layer concern. So then drawing the line between the part of where it's still the web and the part where it's already the business logic, that was the most tricky part for me usually. How did you tackle that, for example? Where do you draw the line?
Yeah, so I guess we can start with what the difference between authentication and authorization, right? So authentication is, am I who I say I am? Or, are you who you say you are? So that's the sort of typical password thing, username and password, that kind of thing. And then authorization is, okay, I am this person. You know that, and what do you have access to? What don't you have access to? I think we kind of, that's the distinction there. Most of us are know that, even if we aren't so familiar with that particular distinction, right? So authentication is never related or never coupled with our domain, right? Sorry, authentication. Did I say authentication? So that one's easy to separate, right? In almost, except for a domain like banking, maybe, where you have probably not even banking. There are passwords and pins there, but if we take any other domain that comes to mind, I've never worked in a domain where authentication was coupled with somehow with the domain, right? That's a sort of purely operational kind of thing. That's why we take a passport to an estate agent or to the bank or wherever it is in real life, right? Because that's something that you don't do. And likewise with web apps, that's really something we don't do in terms of domain logic or business logic so much. But then, authorization is a tough one. So okay, back to authentication. The line is much easier to draw, right? There's much more clear-cut, easy answer there. And then with authorization, it's just been a filter every time, right? Writing the minimum amount of code to get to say pass a token along essentially, and then you've got a choice between whether say if you're using JWT, whether you're going to pass permissions and rights around in a JWT, or whether you're going to sort of pass something much smaller around and just count on doing the work yourself every time. So I've always tried to make that as clean as possible. It's kind of logic that ends up working its way through your controllers, and definitely shouldn't work its way into your model. right? Try to separate that model out as much as possible in terms of this is what it means to be authorized for something versus getting at that information or at that data. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. I kind of agree that authentication might be easier to separate because you basically can create a separate kind of layer of abstraction just for the kind of username password aspect, or like third-party login aspect, tie that to some business entity like a client or I don't know, we're using a streaming platform, so a streamer or whatever. But yeah, authorization, I see it can easily become like something that cannot be detached from your entire domain, something that everything depends on, because you have this this kind of piece of code that does authorization. So do you have any I don't know, like best practices that you follow when you're saying about passing JWT kind of token, right, with the authorization kind of permissions? What was it? What was that called? Is it the scope or
Well,
the
scope
things
is
that you
one,
have access to?
but you can put whatever you want in there as long as you don't put too much. The claims, aren't they claims?
Claims, yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. So what are your kind of the best practices that you try to follow when passing claims around, when the JWT token gets to your service, and then you need to kind of act on that and factor it into some of your business logic, right? Because sometimes your user doesn't have access to something, and that turns off an entire branch of your business logic. So
Yeah, so it's always obviously come down to a filter, literally, and I try to keep it at just that. Um, um, I had something good to say and I've forgotten it. There's definitely been, over and over again, have revisited like the code that does, the authorization to clean it up. I mean, that's code that ends up being really pretty ugly if as it sort of grows, right? When you add more domain objects and you've got to restrict things more or less, and in funny ways when they're nested, right? So that can get a little bit out of hand, and I've never hesitated to go back and rethink it and refactor some of that so that it works nicer. Yeah, I mean the way I sort of picture things ideally is that authorization is in a module of its own. Everything you need, all the interaction you need to do that is there in that one module. You might even be able to get away with exporting, just a few functions to give you, the filter predicate that you need to do that, sort of model by model or domain object by domain object. And yeah, that's the only way to go about it. I don't think there are any quick wins, right? In that way. Yeah.
So by module, you mean what do you mean by module? Like Elixir module
Yeah, exactly.
or a
So
service?
no, I mean Elixir module. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Cool.
yeah.
All right. Do you have any other stories from a security focused company?
Well, actually, I've been doing a lot of looking back, right? So
Yeah.
some of the things, I worked on a couple of years ago. It's almost ironic, right? Or maybe not so ironic. Maybe it's a sort of consequence of authentication and authorization, right? Where that code is sort of vulnerable to being the thing that compromises your security, it seems. So we were using a JWT library in one project, and I'm not sure how it was that I was actually reading through some of the code, but there was an atom an atom leak, or it was basically vulnerable to atom exhaustion. And so that was our JWT library. Went and fixed that. I thought, wow, that's really funny. The sort of entry point to your application is compromising you there. And then there was a bug in an LDAP library as well. I don't remember what that one was about. A colleague of mine worked on that. And again, that was compromising things quite well. That was compromising things as well. And sort of looking back, it's kind of interesting to see how if you'd known, or for those of us who know the platform, it's really easy to write code that isn't going to be vulnerable in the same way those were. Obviously, other sort of attacks, revolve more around knowing the security aspect of things. If you just don't know about timing attacks, then the fact that at night, there's sort of timing attacks that you can around an atom, you'll never be able to sort of you never figure that one out, right? Unless you know about that kind of thing. But it's interesting to see how important familiarity with the technology can be in terms of actually finding a bug, and also how far you've got to go to find that, right? We only stumbled across that because we needed to make a change and happened to notice that actually that dependency dependency had that.
How did you notice that there was you were saying that it was a case of converting a string to atom, and like the memory exhaustion that leads that it leads to, so that you could send any payload and it would be atomized. How did you find out about this?
So we went in to change. It was something about it wasn't working like we wanted it to, and we went in to change to fix that. I think it was code around basically reading a JWT and you're sort of reading the JSON or pass that in. So the code was really about putting those claims together. This is still too high level, isn't it? But I was looking at the code, made the change we wanted, and noticed that actually it was using binary to term, or maybe binary to atom. I think it was binary to term. And that's when I realized that actually, even the standard claims in there were sort of being created with a binary to atom or a binary to term. So yeah, obviously, if you send a bigger JWT over, or you send lots and lots of them with different claims, and you're building those, then with a term to atom, then or a string, binary to atom, then you're gonna get a bigger and bigger atom table, and it's gonna go south.
Yeah. I'm wondering if that could be like prevented on the level of tests, for example, whether you could test if a library is memory safe, depending on or independent of the input. So for example, in this case for JWT library, whether it's kind of memory safe.
I guess the obvious solution that comes to mind, and the one that would be most effective, is to have written a property for that, right? But obviously, you'd have to be looking at the memory.
So you could use the kind of a property of the input, for example, being let's say there's a claim, right? And the claim can be a string and can be any string. So you could probably use property-based testing to test it with different kind of inputs, and then I guess monitor the yeah, the memory footprint of actually of the process that's running the test case. I guess it's
The atom table is a global thing.
oh yeah, all right,
So,
yeah.
so you'd have to
So you need to monitor the memory footprint of the entire VM.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's yeah.
So I think exhaustive kind of approaches to testing can be helpful, but sometimes you think, wow, you really have to test something in particular, really look at something in particular, and if you know about that kind of vulnerability, maybe the best thing to do is just use a static analysis tool and work through your dependencies too. And there are a couple of those for Elixir and Erlang, so those are nice things to look at and maybe work on. Yeah.
Have you used any do you have any library to recommend, like static analysis kind of security oriented library?
So I really only know Sobolo is Elixir or Phoenix.
Solo, yeah. But that's for Phoenix, right? It's
Yeah,
like focused on Phoenix, or can you use it outside of Phoenix context?
I haven't got experience with it, so I don't. But then there's also, if you're working with Erlang, there's also Pest, which does some static analysis there as well. Yeah.
What's the name? Can you?
Pest, PEST.
Pest. Oh, okay.
Primitive Erlang security. And I think that one checks for things like binary to term. So, yeah.
Okay. Cool. All right. So it's almost 8:30. It's really nice talking to you, but I think in order to keep everybody focused and and I remember we got feedback from the last studio that it was way too long, and while it was nice to talk, between the two of us, it's probably listening to more than 1.5 hours. It's going to be tiring, but yeah. So thanks for the conversation. It was really cool to talk to you. Thanks for joining us in warsaw.ex. I hope to see you kind of in warsaw.ex in person when the lockdown is over and everything. And I'll probably drop by in Krakow. Do you have a meetup group in Krakow, like a Elixir meetup
group? It was really active, sort of until the pandemic. We're doing our best here as well, and it was good to chat. I'm definitely looking forward to meeting in person in Warsaw, and I'm looking forward to what's it called, Online Town, right?
Yeah, networking. Yeah, so guys, I'm gonna send you a link. I'll probably do it. Maybe I'll do it here on YouTube. To something called the Online Town, which it's super geeky. It's like I need to explain it before we go there because it's the interface is not super user friendly. You can see that the programmers created it, backend developers. So it's a piece of software that uses WebRTC, and it's a virtual kind of conference room where you log in with your kind of username, and you appear as an avatar, and you can use your arrows and the WSAD to walk around. You can put your name in, so please do that because then we know who's talking. And it's a kind of a proximity thing, as if you get closer to other people, you're going to hear them. There's also a button on the bottom, or a drop down on the bottom, that says how many connections do you support. So if it doesn't work well for you, or you have a bad internet connection, you can kind of limit the amount of people you kind of hear. So I hope it's 13 people so in the stream, so it's not going to be an overkill. So just let me share the link here.
Did you want to demo that here? Did you want to share your screen and maybe demo that?
No. I'll send a link on Yeah, so the link is on the chat. Oh, I can do this. Look at this. If you want to copy it from the screen. No, it's going to be in the chat anyway, so you can copy it from there. Go to the online town. I'm there already. Yeah, and we can talk more and kind of network. And yeah, and once again, thanks a lot, Joseph, for joining us. Thanks for your time. Hope to have you on, maybe on the show. We'll see how it goes. Maybe on warsaw.ex Studio again, or on warsaw.ex meetup when we get back.
Sure.
And yeah, and that's all for today, I guess. Thanks everybody for watching, and let's go to the online town to do some networking.
See you there.
Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.